Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to another chapter of Legal Ease, the show that turns legal jargon into legal ease. Tonight we intend to cover the topic of the electoral process, what the elections are, how they are established, what happens during the electoral count, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome tonight our guest, Advocate Ismail Hussein, Senior Counsel, a former judge of the High Court of South Africa, and a person who has interacted with the Electoral Commission from 1994 to 2004. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam, and assalamu alaikum to the viewers.
Thank you and welcome for tonight. Now, Advocate Ismail Hussein is well known in the Johannesburg area. He's had a practice in Johannesburg for many years, and many attorneys have actually utilized his services when he was still practicing at the bar, and he's back at the bar, but he's more into the training of attorneys. Is that right, Advocate?
Correct, yes.
But your involvement in the electoral process, as I've mentioned, went way back during 1994, during our first democratic elections. Now, it's not well known, or it's not commonly known what the electoral process is. What are the elections all about? We know that it comes about every 4 years, and a whole host of parties register, and you have the main party and you have the main opposition. But really speaking, if you could unpack how is the IEC created, and what is their mandate?
Look, the IEC is created by Chapter 9 of the Constitution. It is one of the so-called Chapter 9 institutions, and its purpose is to conduct the elections. The idea behind it being established by the Constitution is to give it the independence that it needs. In other words, the Electoral Commission is not controlled by the politicians. They are not accountable to politicians, and they act independently. They are funded by the taxpayer, and the funding comes via Parliament. And the electoral formula itself, how the system works, you will find that in the Constitution as well. How Parliament is composed, how many seats, and how votes are then turned into seats in Parliament.
So the first step of the inquiry is really the provisions in the Constitution. So if just by way of example, if one has to talk about another kind of independent body, then it will be like the Human Rights Commission or the Public Protector would be a similar kind of body created by Parliament and funded by the taxpayer, but totally independent.
Correct. The Public Protector, who's been in the news lately, is a similar institution.
Right. And I think there we've seen a vigorous demonstration of independence, and that kind of reinforces the notion that the Chapter 9 institutions, amongst them the IEC, would also demonstrate a impartiality and non-bias towards anyone. But as I've mentioned earlier on, the electoral process is something that's not, it's something removed from our daily lives. So we're less affected by it, and you become more affected by it towards the election. So right now we're entering into a period of where on the 7th of May, the South African public will be going to cast their votes. Now, with regard to the voting itself, how is the ballot paper itself established? Maybe prior to that, we need to talk, how does one register a party to participate in the elections?
Okay. Look, firstly, I must disagree with you that elections don't affect us all the time. But the point is, it affects you every day of your life. The government that's in place is chosen through the ballot box.
Right.
So it's very important for us to vote. Now, registering a party is very easy.
Right.
It's a matter of filling in a form at the Electoral Commission, paying a modest fee, and you've registered a party.
But just on the point of a modest fee, we know that the EFF were were challenging the payment of that fee of 600,000 rand, and a judgment was given against them, and I think ultimately they actually came up with the money. But their view was that the fee was not modest. It was an immodest, and it was a huge amount of money to be asking. So the requirements then cannot be circumvented.
Right. There's a difference between the fee you pay to register a party.
Oh, right.
And then there's another fee that you pay to participate in the election. In other words, to get onto the ballot paper.
Right.
The modest fee is the one you pay to register the party.
Okay.
We register over 1,000 parties.
Well, like the Dacha party.
Anyone can register a party and call it what you want. Dacha party, soccer party, tax party. But when it comes to being on the ballot paper,
yes,
you need to show that you have some kind of support. Now, we can't measure that, especially in a young democracy like ours.
Right.
We don't know how many supporters a particular party has. The established parties like the ANC and the DA and the other parties that are in the opposition, it's easy to work out what their support base is based on their performance in the previous election. But if a party has not participated in any election before, the only way we can prevent the ballot paper from having hundreds of parties, and you'll have an impossible ballot paper if everyone was allowed to participate, is to charge a fee. The fee that the EFF were complaining about, the 600,000, is the fee you have to pay in order to take part in the elections, to be on the ballot paper. However, if you win a seat, that money is refunded.
Yes.
However, if you don't win one seat in Parliament, you forfeit that money. The purpose of the exercise is to keep out people who have no credible support out there, but see elections as a platform for publicity or for whatever private agenda they might have.
Now, just talking about seats, how many votes, if I can put it to you now in layman's terms, bearing in mind, Advocate, that our brief here is to just try and demystify the law. How many votes do you need to secure a seat?
Yes. There's an electoral formula that applies. How that works very simply is that the total number of votes cast in the elections is divided by the number of seats in Parliament. That will give you a figure. In the last election, that number was around 47,000. This election, we expect it to be around between 51 and 55,000. What that means is that a party who participates in the elections needs to get a minimum of between 50 and 55,000 votes to win one seat in Parliament. Now, that's not so easy. If you take a small party that is contesting the election for the first time, for them to mobilize that kind of support, if you take 4 seats, you need to find something like 200,000 people to vote for.
That's nationally now, across the entire...
That would be the national ballot, and the same applies for the provincial ballot.
Yes.
So what happens then is that a party would require enormous resources to be able to mobilize those kinds of numbers to turn up and vote for them on the 7th of May.
Okay, now on the topic of resources itself, that has also been an area of tremendous discussion, like who funds whom. I think in a way we had a glimpse when there was a divorce between the Agang and the DA. There was some insight into resources and who places the resources behind the politicians. What's our understanding of this? From where do parties get their funding?
Look, as far as elections go, we need to look at 2 types of funding. The one is funding for the Electoral Commission. That the taxpayer pays. The more controversial subject is the funding of political parties. As you know, we've had a number of cases in Europe. For instance, the former French minister
Sarkozy
there's an investigation into how he funded his campaign.
Yes.
In
I think
this
it was
country,
through Libyan money. The
well,
accusation was that it was the Libyans.
Libyan money, and that would be embarrassing.
Yes.
In this country, the taxpayers do not fund all of the campaign costs of a political party.
So
there
the
is a
fiscus
fund.
pays part of it.
Yes, there is a fund which is funded by the taxpayer.
Right.
Those funds are administered in terms of an act of parliament, and it is administered by the Electoral Commission. The funding of political parties is based on their support, which is measured by how they performed in the previous election. So the more seats you have in parliament, the bigger the slice of the funding you are going to get.
Right.
So in our current situation, the ANC and the DA would get the bigger portion of the funding.
Right.
With a small party, like say the UDM, would get a very small amount of funding. The funding that is provided out of this fund is never enough.
Right.
For any of the parties. They have to find their own funds.
So it's almost necessary for them to go out to their support base, business or otherwise,
Correct.
and gain further funding in
Correct.
order to properly contest the elections.
Yes. Now the controversial subject is, and this is a matter of debate currently going on,
Yes.
is do we get political parties to disclose
That's
the sources of their funding? The current ruling party is reluctant to do so. There are models that we can look at in other parts of the world, but it will require legislation before that can happen.
But is there any country in the world where the political parties fully disclose, look, I got 10 million rand from a particular company that was selling fertilizer, and is it that transparent?
Not that I know of, except that in some countries there is a threshold.
Yes.
And that if the funding exceeds that threshold, they must now disclose.
Right.
But I know of no country in Africa that does that. Or in the Middle East, or in Southeast Asia, India. They don't have those rules yet.
Just a reminder to our viewers, our lines as always are open, and you're welcome to call on 011 086 7701/2 or 3 to join a very interesting discussion. As I've mentioned, Advocate Hussein, Senior Counsel, is my guest tonight, a very experienced IEC official, and he's taking us through the topic of the electoral process. So, Advocate Hussein, just to come back to the point that we were making, that there's funding provided for the IEC as well as for political parties, and when there's a shortfall, which there always is,
Yes.
they're entitled to go out and gain funding from the marketplace, but as yet not required to disclose who those funders are.
Correct.
Yes.
Yes. There's no current legislation which compels a political party to disclose the sources of their funds.
Now, just to sidestep that topic and bring something else in, which kind of ties up with this. If I'm a political party and I make certain promises to my let's say, constituency, and once I gain the seat, I now have this floor crossing thing. I mean, isn't that a bit strange? I go with one agenda or manifesto, I promise all of these things. When I get into Parliament, I see the grass is greener on the other side.
Well, floor crossing is not is a piece of legislation that has been roundly criticized.
Right.
The basis of the criticism is that a person is voted into Parliament because he represented a certain party. He was on that party's list.
Yes.
People voted for that party, and as a result of him being on that list, he gets a place in Parliament.
Right.
He then gets the opportunity to cross over to another party. That flies in the face of what the electorate is saying.
Yes.
Now, we can debate why this legislation came about. There's a history behind it. The history relates to the battle between the ANC and the DA in the Cape. We also have a situation where in fact, just prior to elections, politicians might decide that they will be better off with another party. Maybe they'd be pushed higher up on the list. They may be offered posts in the next administration, and then they cross over.
Now, obviously, that's a personal decision, and he doesn't have to hearken back to the constitution that put him there in the first place. But I'd like us to pause at this stage because we're going for a short ad break, and we will meet you on the other side of the ad break. Stay tuned. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to the second half of the program. As previously mentioned, our very special guest tonight is Advocate Ismail Hussein, Senior Counsel, and he was very deeply involved with the electoral process since 1994 to 2004. And he's here to educate us about the election and its process. As usual, you're entitled to call in, and the number is 011-086-7701-203. En is welkom ook in Afrikaans ook in te skakel as u nou met de advocaat wil praat. And the number is also on screen, and you're welcome to call. Advocate Hussein, we were talking about something very, very interesting just before the break. We were talking about how the electoral process is put together, but I'd like to focus on something very, important, and that is the actual ballot paper itself. Now, it looks like something you can produce on a color photocopier, but I'm sure it's not that. I'm sure it must be a very sophisticated piece of paper.
Yeah, the printing process itself has certain security measures built into it, such as unique watermarks and so on. However, it is a paper which can be produced.
Yes.
But the elections are run on using a number of security measures and checks and balances, so that it is not easy, in fact, virtually impossible to cheat. If someone, for instance, produces a ballot paper, it's of no use to them, because when you go into a voting station, that voting station will have a certain number of ballot papers issued by the Electoral Commission. They would have audited the number of ballot papers issued, and once you are handed a ballot paper after your name has been marked off the voter's roll and your finger is marked with indelible ink, you then get a ballot paper. That ballot paper then gets a unique stamp on it, which is put there in the voting station. So for someone to benefit from a forged ballot paper, they will need to be able to, first of all, smuggle it into the voting station, then have access to the unique stamp, because if a ballot paper is brought out of a ballot box and it does not contain a unique stamp on it, then it's not counted.
So are we now referring to a spoiled ballot paper? Is that what they refer to as a spoiled ballot paper?
No. A spoiled ballot paper would be a genuine ballot paper which someone goes in and marks and puts into a ballot box. But what happens is a ballot paper is then deemed to be spoiled if the voter did not mark it clearly, so that it is difficult to tell which party they voted for. Or some people go into a voting station and purely as a matter of protest, they would put a line across the whole ballot paper.
So that is definitely a spoiled.
That would be a spoiled ballot paper.
Okay, now my understanding is that the ballot paper itself is very user-friendly. So it's aimed towards people that may not be able to read and write.
Correct.
And they would identify their party how? What would guide them?
The ballot paper is designed on the basis that many of our people are not literate.
Yes.
For instance, if you look at a ballot paper in some of the European countries, it's impossible to vote if you can't read. Whereas ours is quite simple. We will have the logo of the party, which will be in color, and a photograph, a color photograph of the leader of the party. So it's very easy for a person who doesn't read, but they'll be able to identify the logo and identify the leader of the party, and they can mark their cross. And of course, there are awareness programs that are run by the Electoral Commission that are currently running and will run all the way through to elections, where people are taught how to use the ballot paper and what happens in a voting station.
Now, obviously, that kind of ballot paper favors the sighted. What about people with poor eyesight or that are blind? How would they manage the or what if you're colorblind, for example?
Yeah.
I mean,
those people can do one of two things. They can come into the voting station with an assistant. The presiding officer will assist them. Assistance can be provided. And all of this is done under the watchful eyes of observers. Not only independent observers, but the political parties are present in the voting station. So there's no prospect of a blind person being taken in there and being made to vote for someone they don't want to vote for.
And how do prisoners cast their votes?
They cast their votes in prison, but the current system doesn't allow prisoners to vote across provincial boundaries.
Right.
So if you're a prisoner, say in Pretoria Central,
yes,
but you're from Mpumalanga,
yes,
where you registered as a voter, that prisoner can only vote on the national ballot paper, not the provincial.
So even in the prison, you'll have this register of potential voters.
Correct.
And your name will then be crossed out.
Correct.
Now, with regard to the actual, let's say, there's two urban legends that I really need to raise with you.
Okay.
The one is that if you spoil your ballot paper, then by default, the ruling party, in this case the ANC, gets that vote. Is that true?
No, that's absolute nonsense. That's absolute nonsense. It doesn't work like that. What happens in our elections is that people come to the voting station, their names should appear on the voters' roll. If their name does not appear on that segment of the voters' roll, at that voting station, they will not be allowed to vote.
Right.
And if they don't vote, then there's no such thing as their vote goes by default to any particular party. Some countries have a system, for instance, Australia, where it is compulsory to vote. You have to go and vote.
So there's a penalty for not voting.
You get fined if you don't vote. Okay? But even there, a person could go into a voting station and merely spoil the ballot.
And that doesn't mean that the majority party then grabs that vote.
No, no.
Okay, there was a secondary urban legend there that if I refrain from voting, then by default, my vote, my abstention goes to the ruling party.
No,
is that true?
That's also absolute nonsense. The entire counting and verification process that happens during our elections is entirely transparent. The political parties are present when the counting and the verification happens. The whole system is audited, and there's no scope for parties to be allocated votes which don't actually come out of a ballot box.
Okay, now a very important point that we've reached in the discussion, counting and verification. So now you go to your voting station, you cast your vote, and you put your ballot paper into a designated box.
Yes.
So at this point, you're voting for both the national and provincial elections.
Yes.
Now, that box is sealed, and you mentioned earlier on observers. So they're observers observing this whole process, and they'll be making now notes. I understand as well that you're busy training attorneys to be observers.
Yes, the Law Society is putting together an observer mission whereby trained attorneys will be deployed in voting stations around the country to observe the elections. They obviously will have to be registered with the Electoral Commission as observers, and that process is taking place. We have both national and international observers arriving. Very importantly, the political party representatives are in the voting stations and in the counting stations. The international observers that we get recently come mainly from African countries and mostly from SADC. Europe and the United States has stopped sending observers because they say our elections are done so well, they don't need to come and observe anything.
I think that is quite a compliment in a way, that very, let's say, well-developed democracies would say that, look, really, we trust your process and we'd leave it up to the continental observers as well as the local observers.
Yes.
So that does lend credibility to the process. But we were talking about how a vote is counted. So the box is now sealed. Now, who removes the box? Where does it go to?
Yes.
What happens to it in storage?
Well, what the Electoral Commission has done since 1994 is to develop what we call international best practices.
Right.
In 94, most people will recall that we took ballot boxes from voting stations into central or collective counting stations.
Right.
And there the ballots were counted. This is a recipe for chaos. It doesn't work. So what we do now is that where you vote, the voting station becomes a counting station. The vote, when comes 5 o'clock, when everyone has finished voting, the voting station is then closed. Observers are inside, that's party representatives as well as independent observers. The ballot boxes are then opened in the presence of the observers.
Right.
Counting takes place in the voting station, which becomes a counting station. A result sheet is filled in. The result sheet also serves the purpose of an audit. The number of ballot papers that were allocated to the voting station is accounted for. The number of ballot papers used is accounted for. And the ballot papers that are unused are also accounted for. So these numbers must balance out.
Right.
The result is then entered onto a result sheet. The result for that voting station is published immediately by pinning a copy of the result sheet on a visible place outside the voting station. So the people from around the area can see immediately who got the most votes in that area.
So this sounds like a physically challenging, laborious, tiring exercise. Is it so?
Well, it depends on how big the voting station is and how many people cast their vote there. I think the Electoral Commission tries to stick to around 1,500 voters per voting station. Now that's not a lot, it's not particularly onerous to count.
Right.
If the number of voters in a particular voting station is higher than that,
yes,
then obviously there'll be more staff. But the counting process has never been a problem done on this basis. Whereas when we transported the ballot boxes
yes,
to centralized voting counting stations, that became chaotic.
But it's still a physical process. So
yes, it's still a physical process.
Now there was. There was at one time a suggestion that an electronic count is not as reliable as a physical count. Why is that important?
Well, there are some countries, for instance, the United States and some of the European countries that use, where the entire voting process is paperless, it's paper-free rather. The ballot itself is an electronic ballot. It comes up on a screen. The voters' details will be on the computer. The vote cast is logged electronically, and the counting is done electronically. Ultimately, that is the way you'd like to run elections.
Right.
However, to have a purely electronic system means that you must have a very reliable network with very good software, and it must have very sophisticated firewalls so that it can't be hacked into. It has to be protected against viruses and so on. In this country, we don't have a reliable wide area network that we can use.
Yes.
And I don't think our people are ready to go into to use an electronic voting. So the paper ballot is still going to works well for us, and it's quite easy to manage.
Just a reminder to our viewers, you are welcome to call in on 011-086-7701/2 or 3. Advocate Ismail Hussein was a member of the IEC, the Independent Electoral Commission, and he's here to take your calls on a very important topic that we're discussing tonight, and that is of the elections. Now, earlier on we were talking about verification exercises. There is a central command, right? Correct. For the IEC.
Correct.
And it is the equipment replaced for every election, or is it the same equipment? And how, what are the technical requirements for a successful central command?
Yeah, the Electoral Commission uses very high-tech equipment, computers, software, and this has to be upgraded from one election to another.
Right.
I think most people are very familiar with this thing we call the zip machine.
Yes.
That was used to put together the voters' roll.
Right.
Where people's ID books were, the barcode was scanned into this machine. This is a good example of technology at work. The voters' roll would have been very difficult to put together accurately and reliably without the electronic assistance that they had. Now, that machine, for instance, when people went to register this time round, they would have seen a different machine.
Right.
So that is being upgraded. The results center in Pretoria, what happens there is, as I explained, the ballots are counted in the counting station, which is actually the voting station. When the result is published at that counting station, the presiding officer then transmits that result to the results center in Pretoria. Now that is done in 3 different ways. The result is phoned in,
right.
It is faxed in, and it is sent in electronically. So what happens is that staff at the counting center will only put the tally onto the national and provincial tally if the 3 sources match.
Oh, so it is like a cross-verification.
Correct. Cross-verification takes place. And
I take it they by different people. They're not
correct.
Yes.
But the important thing is the process is transparent.
Yes.
The political party representatives are there. Mm-hmm. They have access. They can see how it's done. If there are any queries, they are dealt with immediately. Now, once the result is verified, this goes on to the national and provincial tally boards. You will see, as you will remember from the last election, there were 10 tally boards in the results center. One for the national vote and then the 9 provinces.
You're right.
And that is how the votes are counted. The Electoral Commission also uses geographic information systems. Mm-hmm. You will remember you will see on the screen maps.
Yes.
The map of the country, maps of the provinces, and each party is allocated a color. And you will see the colors changing on the maps.
As the vote tally comes
Correct.
in. Yes.
And the GIS system tells you in one glance what the political landscape is going to look like. And as the votes come in, it changes, and eventually you get the final result.
Time for a short break again. Please stay tuned. We'll find you on the other side of a very short ad break. Welcome back to the final segment of Legal Ease, the show that converts legal jargon into legal ease. Tonight, my very special guest is Advocate Ismail Hussein, who was a member of the Independent Electoral Commission. Now, Advocate Hussein, there's a very interesting development here, because we were talking about how the process is controlled. There's minimizing fraud, and there appears to be cross-checks. You spoke about how the end result is actually sent in by 3 different means and 3 different persons. However, recently, we all know about the controversy surrounding the head of the IEC. Would that have any impact? I mean, the opposition is saying, look, this election cannot be free and fair because of, the events. What's your view on this?
Well, one thing I can say without a doubt, and that is, whatever happens to the chairperson of the Electoral Commission, the Electoral Commission itself as an institution is capable of running the elections as they've done previously. The Electoral Commission is fortunate to have full-time staff who are highly competent technicians, very experienced elections administrators, who will be able to run the whole thing irrespective of the position of the current chairperson.
So it's not person dependent. I mean, it's process dependent. The process appears to be very, very sophisticated and well managed.
I can assure you that the whole process is run by a bunch of technocrats.
Right.
And certainly the chairperson is not one of those.
Right.
It's unfortunate, though, that because of the sensitive nature of elections, there are public perceptions around this. And it's equally unfortunate that the whole question of corruption and maladministration is very high, has a very high profile in the media at the moment. And the chairperson of the Electoral Commission has just found a place in the media right now.
Right.
And in order to manage public perceptions, it may well be the right thing for her to do is to step down.
To take it further, I think the reason for that is never to mar the perception that the IEC is an independent body and is not influenced in any way.
Correct.
Although from what you've said to me, it sounds extremely difficult, if not impossible, to actually commit any kind of fraud. And the accolades given to us by the existing democracies, well established, is that you're doing a good job, so just get ahead with it. Now, we were talking about spoiled ballot papers and the possibility of fraud, etc., and how other institutions. I think you said Australia. What's the position in India? Do they also have a strict ballot that you have to participate, or you pay a penalty?
No, it's not compulsory in India, except that you must remember India is the largest democracy in the world. They have more voters on their roll than any other country in the world.
I'm sure a very long ballot paper.
Well, the elections in India is not conducted on one day.
Oh.
It's conducted over, I think, a period of 3 months, where elections.
But I hope that's not a public holiday for 3 months.
No, it takes place from province to province. The country is divided into various provinces and regions,
of course.
And the Electoral Commission of India then conducts elections in each one of those regions on separate days.
I'll ask you to pause there. I think we have a caller on the line. Caller, go ahead.
Hello, Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Wa alaikum salam.
Who am I speaking to? Ashraf?
Yes.
Ashraf, this is a sister in Islam. I just need to get some information in regard of the public protectors. Can I explain to you my situation?
Please go ahead.
Okay, you know what? I've written to the public protectors in 2011, and they respond. Initially, they responded me to say that they will immediately sort out my problems. But then I got a letter to say that my things are internal and I must sort it out with my employees. You see, I have a 6-year grievance, and it is quite complex and complicated, and what really happened is they responded me by saying that, you know, the must sort out my problems, but right now nothing has been solved. So I don't know what to do in this regard.
I don't know if we qualified to answer it because we don't have all of the facts. However, I do know, and Advocate, you can guide us here, if you're unhappy with the decision by the public protector, you can go back and appeal that decision.
Is it?
Well, it sounds like the public protector didn't make any decision in your case.
No, absolutely nothing. Okay, let me just tell you what was my problem. I have a 6-year grievances with my employees. And I went through all the proper channels. I've been to the unions, the labor relations, and CCMA. And CCMA referred me to public protectors. But they never responded me whatsoever.
I don't know if we can take this any further.
You know, the public protector is from my understanding, is swamped with complaints. And generally they would take up matters that are of a public interest. If there's a dispute between, for instance, yourself and your employer, they would be reluctant to deal with that, and they would leave it to the other fora for resolving disputes to deal with it, such as the CCMA or the Labour Court, rather than the public protector. And that may be the reason why. But I find it unusual that they did not respond to you at all. They should at least write to you to say that this falls outside their area of jurisdiction, and that they should refer you to the proper jurisdiction where you can have this dispute resolved.
Ashraf, I just want to make it clear. Initially, they did respond by the phone to say that they're going to investigate my matter. But later on, I got a written response that I must sort out my problems with as internal, must sort it out with the MM. But now it's already 6 years and no one has done anything about it. You know, they're just making me go in circles.
Well, I think like the Advocate Hussein says, it's not really the Office of the Public Protector that's involved in matters where there are other forums established like the CCMA and the Labour Court. I think if anything, the Labour Court, if you failed at the CCMA, then the Labour Court is still open to you. Yeah. However, you might have some difficulties seeing that it's after a period of 6 years that you'll now be approaching them. My advice would be, if you have the resources, approach an attorney. If you don't, approach one of the legal aid clinics that you'll find at the universities in Johannesburg.
Or the justice centers that are run by Legal Aid SA. There's a justice center near the Johannesburg Justice Center is near the Magistrates Court, and you could consult with one of the attorneys there.
But can you possibly, you know, I'm very isolated. Possibly give me a number or someone of a good labor lawyer there who I can really.
What we can refer you to is the Law Society, and the Law Society has a list of specialist lawyers. And they would be able to say to you who you would find closest to you in terms of your geographical location. So we ourselves are unable to give you any more information except to point you to the Law Society, who hold a register of all the attorneys. And in there, the attorneys also indicate the areas of specialization. Okay, thank you. Thank you for your call. Advocate Hussein, you were just talking about the unfortunate incident, and you very ably cleared up any perception that might be out there in the public eye, in the public domain, that the chairperson, being there or being removed or whatever her role is, will really not impact the electoral process in a way that it could ever be said that the elections were not free and fair.
Correct.
And I think by and large we've been lucky to see almost a violence-free election process. I mean, If I could just point to some of the northern African regions, in the last 2 years or 3 to 4, we've seen tremendous upheavals. We've seen the Arab Spring. We've seen regimes that were there for decades being removed. We've seen in Kenya, in fact, I think the president was indicted for at the ICC for violence against. So I think in a way we should be able to count ourselves lucky that the process is well managed, has got a perception of balance. But now comes a very interesting thing. Now, the ANC has a particular manifesto, and it puts it out and it says, this is what we intend to promise you. And the DA does the same,
Correct.
and all the other fringe parties and the smaller opposition parties each have a say. Now, isn't that very confusing for the electorate? I mean, who does he choose? Everybody seems to be offering him something. It's like going to a supermarket, on every shelf there's an item for sale, but you don't have all the money to buy it.
It can be confusing, but remember, this is a very young democracy. We are still developing. If you look at the older democracies around the world, you'll find that the elections are a two-party race.
Right.
If you look at the United States, it's two parties.
It's Democrats or Republicans?
Republicans. The same in the UK. You'll find the same in the Scandinavian countries and most of the European countries. We may develop towards a system like that where eventually will emerge two very strong parties.
Right.
And they would then contest elections. But our current development in our democracy, we want to allow a multi-party race to take place. Remember, we have a we have a system of proportional representation.
Right. I'll ask you to please pause there.
Right.
We'll come back to that. We have another call on the line. Caller, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
You answered this question, but I just want to test my understanding.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, you answered this already, but I just want to test my understanding. If you're not on the voters' roll, you won't vote, so nobody can grab your vote.
Correct.
But if you are registered and you don't vote, what happens?
Then the same thing happens. There is no such thing as your vote being allocated to anyone. You didn't vote, there is no vote.
Even if you're on the voters' roll?
Correct. What happens is your name will appear on the voters' roll, it will still be there, but in the segment where you are supposed to vote, your name will not be struck out of the voters' roll. It will remain there, and all it will tell us is that you did not vote. But that is information that will be available only on that segment of the roll.
Ah, okay.
Okay.
So I mean, just to clarify again, it's only when you vote that your vote is counted.
Correct.
If you spoil it, if you abstain, if you don't register as a voter,
Not counted.
none of those things go to the ruling party. That's been the urban legend,
Correct.
which I'm very grateful that you cleared up.
Yes.
Thank you for your call.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So we were talking about we were talking about the electoral process and the verifications. Let's just take up with our discussion at that point again. The verification exercises conducted at the IEC headquarters.
Correct.
And it comes through various means, and there's a final count. Now,
Correct.
At what point does the IEC declare every vote is now in?
Correct.
We've checked it, we've tallied it, and we declare A to be the ruling party. At what point do they do that?
Well, first of all, you must have 100% of the voting stations accounting for a result.
Right.
That's the first requirement. The verification process, which is actually an audit,
Right.
is carried out as the votes come in from around 6 o'clock in the
So
evening.
it's live.
It's live.
Yes.
The tally board that you'll see the numbers are changing all the time. As the votes are counted, verified, and put onto the national or provincial tally board,
Yes.
you will see the totals changing
Right.
for each party. This is a system that's very transparent.
I have to stop you there. We've actually run out of time, unfortunately. I take this opportunity for thanking Advocate Hussein for making time to be with us, and you, the viewers, for having joined us. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.